Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Nun Hey in Ksubas, as we learned for 4 times for Yasser Ben Chaim Michal and Elazar Ben Reuma. Now, we at the bottom of let's take it again from the end of the beginning of the Gemara after the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said that even though the rabbis declared that a psula gets 200 and a ba'ula gets 100 as part of it, so if you want to add, you can add on as much as you want. The Gemara says, isn't it obvious? If he wants to give her more, what's the problem? So you might think that no, Rabbanan gave a fixed amount. You know, like we all the girls or the like tachrichim, right? We bury them all in the same simple shrouds, so as not to embarrass the poor people. Machzah shekel, right? That's just to make sure you get the right count, right? The right count. But here it's not to embarrass anybody. So you might think that the rabbi said, no, that's the ksuba. You don't add on anything. You want to give her gifts, give her gifts. They're not part of the ksuba. Kamash Malan, no, that if you want, you can add on. Then the Gemara goes on, 5 lines from the bottom of the page, 5, 6 lines. It doesn't say that he can write for her. Write for her sounds like you can write her like you're giving her a gift. Like you want to add on. Add on means that whatever you add on over and above the 200, you want to add on another million shekels as part of the ksuba. That's part of the ksuba. It's not an additional, it's not a separate gift. You might give her a gift, Stam. That's a gift. But this is Ratz Lahosif, Messiah Rabbeinu Rav. It's a proof to what Rabbeinu said in the name of Rabbeinu. Tonight, all the conditions in the ksuba are part of the ksuba. Well, my nafkamina, we're going to explain in a minute. Nafkamina for many different things that we're going to describe right now, meaning it's all part of the ksuba. All the rules of the ksuba apply to the conditions of the ksuba too, besides the 200. What do we mean by that? Let's say she sells her ksuba. We talked before about if she sells her ksuba, maybe she sells it at a discount because there's a chance that you'll get the whole amount. There's a chance that you'll get nothing if she dies, if she deceases her husband, right? She doesn't get it, it goes to her husband. So, except for the two has been different. But let's say she sells her ksuba or macheles, or she forgives her ksuba. So in both those cases, Rashi says, macheres ksubasa, macheles ksubasa, machemer esakol. It's all called the ksuba. You don't say the ksuba is the 200. The extra amount is extras. No, it's all part of the ksuba. So if she sells her ksuba, she's ksuba lemoredes. Let's say she rebels against her husband. She rebels against her husband. She doesn't want to perform her wife's duties, let's call them, right? Whether it's intimacy or whatever she's supposed to do in the house, taking care of the house, however they split up their chores, whatever the chores are that she's supposed to do, if she doesn't do them, so then it says that the Gemara tells us there, we'll see later on, that we reduce from her ksuba. If she doesn't perform, let's say she's supposed to sew X amount or clean X amount, if he has to pay somebody else to do it, he can deduct that from the ksuba. Point is, he can deduct the Tosfos ksuba also. Let's say she goes beyond the $200, right? She's caused him a loss of more than the 200. Goes into Tosfos. Tosfos is all part of the ksuba. Ulapogemes. Let's say she admits part of her ksuba is paid already. The rule is when she's coming to collect her ksuba, let's say from the Yisomim, right after the husband dies, if she admits that she was paid part of it, she must swear. In other words, if the Yisomim could say, listen, there's a dispute. Has she been paid? How much of the ksuba has she already been paid? Once pogemes means once you damage the ksuba, you injure it. She admits that part of it's paid. Then the rest she has to collect only with a shvua from the yisomim. So the same thing applies if she admits that part of the tosefes has been paid. It's all part of the ksuba. L'tovas, let's say she's demanding her ksuba. She comes to court and demands her ksuba. There's the chum saratos ksuba bezin. Once she demands her ksuba, we had that the other day, she's no longer entitled to mizonos, because that's it, she's on her way out. So again, if she's toveh, even the tosfos, that's also the extra part, the additional amount that he gave, that's also part of the ksuba. Ula over sadas. If a woman, we're going to talk about this later on, if a woman, became, let's say, irreligious, and she's over das, there's das motion, there's das Shiur, we'll talk about that. Certainly if she went against the Torah, she doesn't keep Shabbos anymore, or she doesn't keep Nida, whatever it is. Those are like the Orisas, and even things which are customs. The Gemara talks about Das Yehudas in terms of covering her hair in public and things like that. She goes against the Jewish customs, let's call that. If she goes against the Jewish customs, the same thing applies that what of Dasberg might say she can leave and he doesn't pay the ksuba. The same thing applies to the Tosefes ksuba. Even though he promised her $1 million, but if she either rebels, we had before if she rebels and doesn't do all her work, you can deduct from the ksuba. And if she becomes irreligious, she gives up on the halachas and the Torah. She's not religious anymore. He doesn't have to give the ksuba at all. L'shvach. Shvach means improvements. We have a rule that a bechor doesn't get a double share in the shvach that increased efforts. And as we remember, that a bechor always gets a double share. If there's a firstborn male, he gets a double share over and above his brothers in the Yerusha. But the rule is, Eina bechor nota baroik b'mochzik. He only gets what's there, what's extant at the time of death. Let's say fruits grew later on, or whatever, the stuff improved later on. And by the time they came to split up the Yerusha, it was worth more. There was a lot more. He doesn't get a share in that. He only gets a double share in what was there at the time of death. Well, the same thing. She only gets her share, right? She, in the share when she's collecting the ksuba and the tosefes, she only gets it. She can't collect from what improved after death. She can only get what was there at the time of her husband's death. L'shvua. Rashi says l'chomir l'shvua al ksuba gon. Let's say she collects not in front of the Orshim. She's collecting the money they're not there, so it's an absentia for them. So when she's coming to court to collect, she has to make a shvua. Or eid echad meida shipura, or 1/8 says it's already been paid up. She's already paid the ksuba, so now she can only collect with the shvua, things of that sort. Tosas also the extra part of an afras mechasim mishibanim. When she's collecting, let's say from the chasim mishibanim, let's say she comes to collect her field. He sold the field, but all his fields were mishibater. She had a first lien on the field. She collects basically from karka usually, as we'll see. So now she has to collect from some person who had bought the field from her husband, and so she also has to make a shvua. Well, whether she's collecting the basic 200 or the extra part, the extra $1 million, she has to make a shvua there. Ula shvias. That applies to us now, right? If those of us who don't, if you're owed money by somebody, you don't write a prusbul between now and the end of the year, you lost your money, right? You lost your money. So, but that's only, what's the concept of prusbul? That you basically hand over your loans to the court. The court's collecting. Well, the same thing applies when it comes to a ksuba. The ksuba's isha is like a court mandate. It's a court ordered that. So shvius is not misham the ksuba. You might say, what do you mean? A man lives with his wife for 20, 30, 50, 60 years. There's a lot of shmitas that happened. Shemitah took off the, I don't know if paid the ksuba. There was a shemitah, right? No, it doesn't apply to the ksuba. It's also like a court order. It's like it's a Tanai Bezdin. So it's also like it's a ruling of Bezdin. So shvius doesn't apply. In other words, doesn't apply to the 200, doesn't apply to the Tosefes. All these rules that we're saying is that the Tosefes, the extra $1 million applies to the rules of Ksuba apply to the Tosefes as well as to the 200. Well, of course, it's called the Chasal Levanav. The Shalom whether this is by a Shivmera or not, but the Pashut Shat, most of the Rishonim hold that it applies to everybody. Meaning, yes, basically all his nechasim are meshubad to the Ksuba. She can collect any land that he had. However, let's say he writes all his nechasim. We had this in yesterday's Rashi, also 4 lines from the top of Nandal and Beis. Here Rashi quotes it also on this stuff that if a man gives away all his karka in his lifetime, right? He didn't wait for the Yerusha. He gave it all away. He gave all his kids Yerusha, and he gave a certain plot of land for the ksuba that would cover the ksuba. So once he does that, she's not entitled to the other stuff. So because of Mechasim Levana, and he wrote her also his share because of Lishto Karka Kolshu, she's lost her ksuba, and as well as the Tosefes ksuba, because that's the karka that she can collect from. She can't go to the stuff that he gave to the kids. So that's another rule. Legos Mina Karka. Just like the ksuba collects from karka, and not from metalclin, unless he set it aside, as we'll see. So here also Rashi says, element of karka, but ksuba is collected basically from karka. Can't go after metalclin unless he set it aside. Ligos mina karka. So the Tosefes is also like the basic 200. Umin is a and from the worst of his land. And another rule, because man should base up here. The rule is this: let's say husband dies and she's stays in the house. Remember, part of the Tanakh Ksuba is that she's to be fed from his assets as long as she doesn't remarry, as long as she stays in the house and doesn't remarry. If he has a house, we talked about that yesterday. However, once she moves out and says, I had enough with these kids, I'm moving back to my father's house. So he only has to feed her for a certain amount of time, like 25 years or something like that. He could send the food up to 25 years. As like if she stays in her husband's house, she could stay there forever. That she can collect. In other words, once she moves to her father's house, she moves out. They don't have to feed her anymore. She can collect the ksuba up until 25 years. If she more than 25 years, she's mochel. If she didn't collect the ksuba for 25 years, that's a long time. She's mochel. So that rule about kozman she beisavia, she's entitled to collect the ksuba, but not the mazonos. As long for 25 years, she's up to 25 years in her father's house. She collects ksuba that applies to the extra part, to the $1 million also. Well, the ksuba's been indifferent. What's the ksuba's been indifferent? Remember, the ksuba's been indifferent says that her male sons will, when they inherit from the father after she dies, and then her husband dies, her male sons will get the $1 million that her father gave, or let's say call it the $2 million, the extra part that was given over and above the other sons that the husband may have from other women. So this rule about that's the part that the father-in-law gave, to go to his grandsons, but they're still entitled to the regular ksuba, right, to the regular 200, as well as the tosefet. So these kids will come out pretty well, right? They'll get their grandfather's money, and they'll get the 200, and they'll get the tosefes. That's what Rashi explains. So for all these rules, the tosefes, the extra part, the tosefes ksuba applies just like the ksuba itself. Itmar. Ksuba's been indifferent. What about that extra part? Let's say the father-in-law gave Nadan and Nadunya a dowry of $2 million. And he said that's to go to his male grandsons. Remember, it doesn't apply to the girls. It applies to the male grandsons when they collect. So it says when they collect, they can't collect with the chasim shabadim. Why? Lo tafim shabadim, then collect shabadim, because yarsun tanan. The lashon of the Mishnah was, if you look back in the Mishnah on Gimel and Beis, we talked about the Benin Dichrin, that it's automatically part of the ksuba. It says, those male sons that I have from you, from this woman whose father gave the $2 million, they will inherit the money of the ksuba. Inherit means only what's there. They can't collect from the shubadim. The rules of inheritance don't apply to Machas Shubadim. A ksuba, what does that mean? A guy gets married in 1970. And he gives her a ksuba. So she's entitled, she has first lien on his property. If he sold some of that property and then he dies, 70 years later or whatever, she can go after that property. But when he dies 70 years later, the Yorshim, any children that they don't have a lien on that property. They only collect what's there, what's available at the time of death, whatever the father left. He may have left nothing. So he says, this ksuba's been different also. Can they collect from the chasim shabadim? Is that like part of the ksuba? They collect. So in Pumpadisa they said they cannot collect shabadim because it says Yarshin, Yerusha. The name of Machasia in that town in Bavel, they said they could Tafim Shabadi, Yasfun Tanan. They will take it. They were owed it like they bought it, meaning that the bin subznicha is like the ksuba in the sense that you could collect from Shabadim. But the halacha is like the Girsa we had in our Mishnah, that it doesn't say they will take it, but rather they will inherit it. So even though it's written into the ksuba, right? We said before that the Tosfos is written in the ksuba, ksuba's indifferent, the ksuba's indifferent still says Yerusha. Remember, the rabbis gave it the power of Yerusha and the power of the ksuba. So it doesn't work like a regular a shibud, but it's still only like a Yerusha. It's only number one if it's there, and they can't. If he sold the property, it's not around. You can't go after it because it's a Yerusha. It's not. Let's say let's say the husband set aside metaltlin for her for the ksuba. Here Rashi says we're speaking about metaltlin sanayim hamiyach. Rashi, the first of the wide lines on the page. He says, listen, I'm not gonna, I know you can collect from karka, but I'm setting aside money for you. I have a trust fund or a bank account, and I'm setting aside this metaltalin, kesek is also metaltalin. I'm setting this aside for your Yerusha, and it's here. Guy dies and the money's there. So metaltalin is benai is there below shvua. She can benai below shvua. She can collect without a shvua because you assume he set that aside. What's the reason why we say normally that she has to make a shvua to collect the ksuba? Because we're afraid maybe he already paid her, maybe he had a separate bank account and the kids don't know about it. But over here, where it's clear he set this aside, this will be for your ksuba. She can collect without a shvua. Let's say it's lost. Whatever metaltalon was, it might have been a bank account, it might have been some clothes, it might have been some items, whatever. If it's not here, it's lost. So you could still collect without a shvua, because the odds are he didn't set aside anything else, right? Rashi says the kivim David, honey. So you can't assume that he has set aside. The lashon of the Rashi brings down the more dilmat sorry atfasa. Maybe he left her a bundle somewhere else, right? But since this was here and now it got lost, you assume he didn't cite another one, and therefore she can collect without a shvua. The law is he can collect without a shvua. Because once you know that he set aside a certain thing, you assume he didn't set aside anything else. So if it's not here, she can still collect from the other nechasim. Because if that money's not here, he set this aside. If it's here, she can collect without a shvua. If it's not here and she has to go after other assets, because all his assets are meshubah to the ksuba, if there's nothing here, if whatever he did set aside is no longer here, she can collect without a shvua because you don't assume that he set aside something else. Those are below shvua. So let's say he said, okay, I'm going to set you aside this piece of land. You're going to collect this land as your ksuba. And he defined it by the four borders of the land. That's very clearly defined. So again, she can collect it without a shvua. The chad metzger, but let's say he only set aside the land and he only delineated one side. So it's not clear where it is. Where it is. From this summer, but still collect without a shvua, that's good enough. But they must collect with the shvua, because again, you're afraid that maybe it's not, you don't know for sure. Maybe he set aside something else. If he only said, I'll give it to you on bordering on the Browns property, but he didn't say which way, which the direction is. So you're not sure. So you're afraid that maybe he did set aside some other money and therefore she can only collect with the shvua. Now another case that's not related to ksuba. Let's say in general, a man said to these witnesses, listen, I'd like to give this guy, I'd like to give Yankel some karka, some land. So write the gift. I'm writing it as a star. I'm writing a star matana and sign and give it to him. You sign it, etc. Give it to him. If they made a kinyan, that's a symbolic gesture showing ownership, like he gave it over to them to give to him. Then they don't have to ask him again. In other words, they don't have to ask him, do you want us to follow up and do it? If they didn't make a kinyan, you don't have to ask him again. Right? Again, there's different machlokas in here. It's probably brought down because Pumbedis and Bnei Mas Machasi argued about it. You have to ask him. If he didn't make a symbolic kinyan, it's a symbolic gesture, then a symbolic acquisition, you have to ask him again before they give it to him. Do you really want to do it? The idea of a kinyan is it's always a symbolic gesture, because the real kinyan, we said many times, is the desire of the makna, the person who is giving it away or selling it or whatever reason transferring it, to give it to that other person. Whatever a kinyan is, for metaltalon you have to do hagbah, or if it's like an animal, you can't pick up, do mashicha. Right? Different kinds of kinyanim. Those are all symbolic gestures, which the rabbi said are necessary, but the real thing that gives it to you is my intention to give it to you. You can make all the kinyan in the world, but if I didn't want to give it to you, you can't make a kinyan on my item and keep it. It's only my desire and the agreement between us to transfer it to you. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. Now let's go back to the Mishnah. Mishnah said that normally we said that when do you write a ksuba like we do today? Well, today they do Eris and Nesuin at the same time, but it's done at the time of the Nesuin. However, there were locales and times when the rabbis even assigned it from the time of Eris. Or sometimes, let's assume you do it from the Nesuin, but this person happened to write it already from the time of Eris. He was in love and he says, I'm going to give you I'm going to write the ksuba right now. I'm going to make all my obligations from right now. So let's say he did it from Eris, and then she was widowed or divorced. Things went bad. He died before the Nesuin, before they before they were fully married, or he divorced her. Things changed. So what does she collect? So the Tanakama said she can collect the whole thing. Since he wrote the whole ksuba, he gets everything, the basic 200 plus the additional amount. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said If they were married and he consummated the marriage, then she gets everything. Mina Erison, but if she was divorced or widowed from the time of betrothal before full marriage, then she only gets the basic amount, the 200 or the 100. Now, what's the halal? That's Rav Elazar ben Azariah. Now, usually when the Rabbanan argue with Rav Elazar ben Azariah, right, you go, Yachad Barab, Malach Karabah. Here, though, we're going to have different opinions. Itmar, Rav and Rav Nassan, Chad Omar Alach Rav Elazar ben Azariah. Now, Rav, was a Tana also. Rav was the beginning of the Moram, the end of the Torah, but we have Gemara throughout. Rav Tana Upalig. So Rav, even though Shmuel, the Gemara doesn't use it about Shmuel, but Rav and Shmuel were contemporaries. Rav and Shmuel were considered to be like Tanam. So Rav and Rebbe Nassan were Tanam. One says, Chad says, Halach Rav Elazar ben Azariah. Now, what's the idea that Halach is like Rav Elazar ben Azariah? Rav Elazar ben Azariah said, sure, he wrote the whole thing at the time of betrothal or right after the time of betrothal, but he did it with the intention of marrying her. He wasn't planning on giving her all this money without having the enjoyment of marrying her. So that's Rav Elazar ben Azariah's svara. In other words, that we assess his intention, even though he wrote it at the time of the betrothal, but his intention was to give it only if they get married. So we had a machlokas. Is the halacha like Rav Elazar ben Azariah? Who says what? Rav and Rav Nassan. One says the halacha is like Rav Elazar, one says not. Who is the one who says the halacha is like? So the Gemara is going to prove this time to Rav Nassan who dam malach Rav Elazar ben Azariah. We're going to prove now that Rav Elazar is the one who goes like Rav Azariah. Why? The Shemil Rav, because we heard that Rav Nassan said the Asl Basar Umda. We found elsewhere that Rav Nassan says you look at Umdana. Umda means you make an assessment. You assess his intentions, even though he didn't say it. He wrote it at the time of betrothal, but we assume that that's what he means. He only meant to give it if he would consummate the marriage. And since Rav Nassan says elsewhere that we go basar umdana, we look at assesses the intention. So therefore, he probably goes like Rav Elazar ben Azariah, who says over here we assess his intention. Where do we find that Rav Nassan says elsewhere he assesses intention? A person who's in danger. What does that mean? The Gemara over there in Gittin says, Rashi brings down, a person is making a sea journey, or he's going on a caravan, he's going on a long trip, and he says, write a get for his wife. Even though he didn't say give it to her, he just said write the get for his wife. Right? He didn't say write it and give it to her. We assume because he's busy with the trip and he's worried about dying on the trip and packing and everything else like that. So he's confused, and he didn't get a chance to say give it to his wife. He just said write a get for his wife. Of course, if you give a get to his wife after he's dead, that's not going to help, right? The guy doesn't show up. You can't just hold it and then give it to him later on. Maybe he's dead, so you don't know if he's you don't know. And what's an afkamina? An afkamina would be, let's say he left the brother here and there were no children. It could be a question of yibum or not. You can't just give her a get now. So what do? He just said write a get for his wife. So we assume that he meant to say give it also, right? Shimon Shazuri adds on, he says, listen, not only a person who's on a wet trip, just a person whose life is in danger. He's a ghost. He's laying in bed and he says, write a get for my wife. You assume that he means to give it right now, right? So we assess his intentions. He says only write it only because he wanted to give it, and so he wasn't planning on making a joke here. Write a get. I'll play with her. I'll give you the get. I won't give you the get. He's on his deathbed, and he says write a get for his wife. You write it and give it. That's from Shimon Shazuri. And Rav Nassan said the loch is like Shimon Shazuri. He said loch is Shimon Shazuri the Mesukan in that case, and also Metrumas Meiser Shel Demai. Now, I don't think there's a proof from here about Umdana. I think this is just a case that the halacha is like Shimon Shazuri in the case of Trumas Meiser Shel Demai. I saw one of the Pirushim did say that you see over here intention. I don't see how you see the intention here. What's this case? What's the halacha of Demai? Demai is if you buy produce from an Amoretz, you can assume he gave Truma because that's a punishment of death. Yes, Truma. Meiser, not so much. Now, so when you give Meiser, you should give Meiser. But when you give Meiser, you take Meiser. From that, you have to give the Levi who you give it to has to give Meiser Mena Meiser. It's called Trumas Meiser to the Kohen. That's also considered Truma. Can't eat that on punishment of death, and only the Kohen can eat it. So let's say you went to a Amoritz and you bought the Meiser and you were mafresh Trumas Meiser to give to the Kohen, and then it got mixed up with the Meiser itself, with the that you bought, right? With the produce itself, it got mixed up with the whole produce. In other words, not get mixed with Meiser, it got mixed up with the whole produce. You bought 100 bushels, a truckload, let's say, of truma from Amoritz. You assume he gave truma, but The Meiser he didn't. So you separated Meiser, then you separated the Trumas Meiser or the Levi, separated Trumas Meiser, and then it got mixed up with the whole truckload. So what can you do? Either sell it to a coin at a reduced price because he could eat it. He can eat the whole truckload, but for you it's a big loss because instead of something which is marketable to everybody, now you can only market it to a coin. So the rabbi said over there first talks about on Shabbos. So can you go back to the Amaretz and say, listen, were you Mafresh Meiser? If the Amaretz says, yeah, I already gave, I know we're always under suspicion, us Amaratzim, but I gave the Meiser. You can rely on that, and therefore if you gave the Meiser on it, the whole truckload's already chulin. There's nothing to worry about, right? So whoever that talks about on Shabbos, everybody agrees you can trust him. Rashi says because on Shabbos, because of Onik Shabbos. Tosafos says not because of Onik Shabbos, but rather because the fear you wouldn't lie about Shabbos. So, but that's on Shabbos. But what about during the weekdays? Rav Shapiro says even during the weekdays you can ask him, right? You can even on the weekdays, right? You could ask him that. Rav Shapiro says af b'chol sholam aretz shalach lechem v'ochlan al piv. You can rely on that. Even if you can rely on that. I don't see how the idea is the intention, how you see umdana here. I don't think this is umdana. I think that the umdana you see from the case of Masukah, the guy's dying, and he says, give a get to his wife, even though he didn't, he said, write a get for his wife, even though he didn't say give it, he meant to say give it. That's umdana. This is just another case that he passed like a Shemshur. That's how I see it. Maybe wrong. So the point is, since you see Rav Nassan says, like Shemshur by Masukah, you see that he goes basar umdana, that he looks at, we assess the person's intentions. So he's probably the one who holds like a Blazer ben Azariah in our Mishnah, that we assess his intentions, even though he wrote the whole Ksubah, including the extra $1 million of Tosefes at the time of Erusin, he only meant to give it after they consummated the marriage. We assume that's his intention. So Rav Nassan holds you assess his intention, so he's probably the one who holds like a Blazer ben Azariah. Says the Gemara, oh, so you're assuming now Rav and Rav Nassan, one says Lach is like a Blazer ben Azariah, one says Lach is not like a Blazer ben Azariah. So you assume the one who says Lach is like a Azariah is Rav Nassan because he holds you go Basar Umdana. Rav Lo also Basar Umdana. Doesn't Rav also go according to assessing? Doesn't hold of assessing one's intentions. Boitmar, we learned this. Listen to this case. Matna Shchimira. The rule is this of Shchimira. The rabbi said Shchimira was dying, and he says give something. He says give this to whatever. It's as if it's written down in a shtar, because he gave him that intention. In other words, what is he doing? Say Shchimira doesn't want to die without giving away something, and he can't give it after death. So, but he means to say is if he dies, he wants us to go to Jim. Give this sum to Jim if I die, right? You can't give it after death. So we assume at the time of death, we feel it's as if he wrote it in a shtar. That's the rule of a shchimera. That's called matna shchimera kichsuvim. It's as if it's written down. But the rabbis also gave him an advantage. They said, he says shchimera, let's say he recovers. He's about to die. You know, it's happened sometimes that the doctors say, we give him 5 minutes and he lived another 50 years, right? It's happened. Doctors make mistakes sometimes, right? Right. And he lived 50 years. So if he recovers, he didn't really want to give it away. So if he gives it away, he doesn't want it all to go to that son of his. He wants to give it to his friend Jim. So that's the rule of Shchimera. Let's say in the Matan of Shchimera, Shekasa Kinyan. They wrote down what he said, and it's written in there also that he's makna with a kinyan, that he's giving it with a symbolic gesture. So which one is it? You see, if a regular person who writes something and he gives it over to Jim, he's writing a shtar and they make a proper kinyan and he gives it to Jim. So you can't renege on it. You can't be an Indian giver. It's already that guy's. You give somebody a house. You can't come back next year and say, I want my house back. You gave it to him already. So that's by a bari. But a shchimera, who there's no kinyan there, he just says, I'm dying here. I want this to go to Jim. It's as if it's written down and you give it to Jim at the time of death. So let's say though, the man shchimera shekasuba. When he wrote it, he said, write this down. And he wrote, I want to be with a kinyan. So how does that go? Is that like a bari or like a shchimera? So the Bei Rav made the Rav in the school of Rav in the name of Rav Amri, Arkabeshta Atrei Rachshi. The shchimera who did this, he gave him the power of 2 horses, meaning of like 2 guys' horses, extra power. What do we mean by that? We'll explain in a second. Shmuel says, I don't know how to deal with this case. Is it a shchimera, which means he can go back on the deal if he recovers, right? Or is it like a bari and he can't go back on the deal? We're not sure. So let's explain Rav. The Bei Rav made Rav Amri Arkabash to Erachshi. It's like he made it ride on 2 horses, on 2 loaded horses. They're all dressed up for armor. It's like the gift of a bari, of a healthy person. It's like the gift of shemira. In other words, it's a very strong kinyan. Because what he said effectively is, I want it to do with the kinyan, meaning he can't go back if he recovers. So it's a very strong kinyan. He made this transfer very, very strong. It's like riding on two horses. That's what he says. It's like riding on two horses. I gave him the power of a bari, that if he recovers, he can't renege, can't go back on the deal. And a recommend the shemira she'em amar. In what sense? If he said, halvasi leploni, the loan that I have outstanding with Yankel, halvasi leploni, I want it to go to Jim now, even though there was no kinyan. Normally, you can't take money. Money can't be transferred just by word of mouth, right? You can't even do it with a chalip, and it's got to be done like agav karko. You're giving money to somebody. You don't hand it hand to hand. He says, the money that I have I want it to go to this guy. Well, where's the kinyan? So he says, you know what Rav said? When he said, I'm doing a shchimera, I'm a shchimera, matan shchimera, and I'm doing with a kinyan, it's to give it a double power. Number one, you can't go back on it. And number two, that you can transfer money this way. If he says the money that I have with that outstanding with Yankel, I'm giving to Jim, it's considered Jim's now. So I'm giving it a double power, meaning we assess his intentions. That's what Rav is saying. Why did he say, I'm giving it away if I die and doing it with a kinyan, writing it into the star with a kinyan, do it with a kinyan to give it double power. I don't know how to judge this. Maybe what he meant to say is it's a shchimira, but I'm only doing it, not giving it as a mat the shchimira, which is chal, it's chal a second before death, or he's doing it mafreya from right now, but he's doing it while he's alive. But if he says, I'm doing it with a kinyan, maybe he only wants it with a star. You can't write a star after death. You can't do it after death like a get. You can't give a get after death. You can't give a star after death. You can't write a star after death. So Shmuel says he doesn't know what to deal with, but Rav says, no, we assess his intention. So what do you see? The Rav also holds of assessing intentions. So how do we know when in the Machlokas Rav and Rav Dasan, do we pass on Kabbalah Nazariah who says we assess his intention? In the case of the guy giving the ksuba and the tosafs, and said, oh, he only wanted to give it if he consummated the marriage. That's what Lazar Nazari. We assess his intentions. He goes Basar Umdana. So we want to say it was Rav Nassan goes Basar Umdana. He's the one who passes like a Lazari. No, Rav also is Basar Umdana. Says the Gemara at the top of Nunvav. Ela Tavai also Basar Umdana. Both Rav and Rav Nassan both hold of Umdana. They both hold of Umdana. So, but we say one holds like Rav Lazari, one holds Mandomer Halacha. The one who says Halacha like Rav Lazari, obviously Shapir. That's very good. He also goes Basar Umdana. Where one of them, we don't know which one. One of them holds like Lazar because he goes Basar Umdana. Very simple. Rav Lazar but Lazar holds Basar Umdana, and he holds Basar Umdana. The one who says Lachas like Rav Lazar, Hachanami Umdan Daita. Here it's also assessing his intention. Why? Mishum Ekruve Daitahu. The reason why he wrote the shtar. Why did he give her the ksuba and the tosefes at the time of betrothal, the time of erison? Because he's trying to show his love. He's trying to show his affection. He's trying to show his sense of attachment. How he loves her and he wants to give her this money. And he did that. So he's done it. In other words, we're saying his intention. You say his intention was only to give it at the time of Nisuin, says Rav Lovzai. Says no. His intention was he loves her so much that he's saying even from the time of erison, even if I don't consummate, whatever happens, I'm giving you the money anyway. So that's his intent. That's a way to describe the intention. Therefore, he says, "Lach is not like a Rabbanan. Lach is like Rabbanan, that she gets everything, even if he dies or divorces her from at the time after betrothal before marriage." What's the halacha? Yasser Rav Chanina, the Gerson, the Chumash teacher, came in front of Yanai, but come out, Lach is like Razai. Said that Amalei, Rav Yanai didn't hold of that. Rav Yanai said to him, "Puk kari karachal abroad. Go read your Torah verses outside." You don't say that in the base medrash because Rabbi Yanai held ein al chagavaz Messiah. Amar Yitzchak Rabdimi Mishum Rabbeinu. Yitzchak said in the name of Rabbeinu. Normally, when it says Mishum Rabbeinu in Shas, it's usually Rav. Rashi says top line on the page Mishum Rabbeinu Rav. Tosafos says no, not over here, because if it would be, what is he saying here? Amar Yitzchak Rabdimi Mishum Rav halach chagavaz Messiah. Well, that would solve our dispute. We had a machlokas we were dealing with who owns chagavaz Messiah, Rav or Rav Nassan. We couldn't prove it. Who owns Basar Umdana? If this is Rav, so here's a proof from here. If Rabbeinu is Rav, so here's a proof that Rav is the one who says Lach Rav Zara and Rav Nassim would say not. So Tosafos disagrees. Tosafos Rabbeinu over here is Rebbe because there actually were two Yitzchak Rabdimis. One was a student of Rebbe, and maybe another one was a student of Rav. This is the one. Rebbe means Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So Tos says Rabbeinu is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Lacha is like a blessed Messiah. Amar Nachman Shmuel. Nachman says name is Shmuel. Blessed Messiah. Nachman the Nachman himself held ain't halacha. Messiah, but now in other words, there was a question: what did Rav Nachman himself hold? Did he one way is that he held not halacha like a Messiah, Nardah, and Rav Nachman's own Rebbe Shmuel said halacha is like a Messiah. Ba'afagav, the lot Rav Nachman, even though Rav Nachman cursed, Amar Kol Daina the dawn for Rav Messiah, he said, whoever paskins like a Messiah, hachi bachi tabe, this and such will befall him. Don't go like a Messiah. The Allah is still like a blessed Messiah, and the Gemara paskins Allah lemaisa for blessed Messiah. And Allah lemaisa means they paskin the real case. Allah lemaisa hashaska pasik shekachnim the begomer b'nei yeshiva. Not this was a case like that, but they took a vote in the yeshiva and they paskin like a blessed Messiah, which says that even though he wrote her a big subah at the time of betrothal, if he died or divorced her before they got married, she only gets the Mana Masayim. She does not get the Tosus Ksuba. All right, we'll pick up here tomorrow. It's Hashem, 17 lines down on the page where we are right now, the 2 dots. Have a good day.